Good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by thanking Walter Edwards for this opportunity to participate in this symposium. Also, I want to mention, yes. And I also want to thank Dean Thomas for being with us this morning. I need to begin with the following. You may notice some overlap between the presentation with which Renee began this morning and my presentation, because I was not aware that she was going to do the presentation that she did in terms of the definitions and so forth. Mine is more focused on German culture, but nevertheless, there will be some repetition. But as we teachers know, and as we tell our students, repetition is a good thing, not a bad thing. The concept of Bildung is of critical importance in German culture through the centuries and has multiple connotations and a rich and complex history. According to Eckhard Nussel von Rhein, director of the German Institute for Adult Education, the Leibniz Center for Lifelong Learning, the German term Bildung, quote, has no equivalent as such in any other of the European languages. Not only is it more comprehensive than education, it is above all more complex and holistic in meaning. It is difficult to define even in the German language, unquote. Moreover, Mr. von Rhein informs us, Bildung is the ideal interdisciplinary platform to address the educational challenges of the 21st century. And that is perhaps the crux of the presentation that Professor Klein and I will be making this morning. What we know is that Bildung not only implies the dimension of teaching, but also that of learning, sich bilden. Not only knowledge and skills, but as Renee said earlier, values, ethos, personality, authenticity, and humanity. This is a quotation by Nussel von Rhein. The reflexive verb sich bilden, then, is never used as a synonym of erziehen, to educate, to bring up, lehren, to teach, or unterrichten, to instruct, because these three latter verbs are insufficient to carry the concept of the totality of learning that sich bilden incorporates and implies. We can also use nouns such as Entwicklung, development, and Erziehung, upbringing, as further examples that do not provide the total meaning of Bildung. The most important aspect of our presentation today, therefore, is that the concept of Bildung, in all of its richness and complexity of meaning, most assuredly has significant implications for curriculum, pedagogy, and learning today. It is not at all, to quote just one phrase from the Humanities Center explication of this symposium topic, quote, an elitist and outdated concept of the past, unquote. On the contrary, it is what Klaus Prange, another noted scholar, calls, quote, a paradigm regained, unquote. He argues, Bildung is a key concept in the German tradition of educational theory, originally meant to indicate a specific state of mind and ideal of perfection. It now serves as a symbol of the unity of whatever refers to the field of education. It keeps alive the memory of autonomous learning as opposed to regular training under the imperatives of the day. The paradigm of Bildung survives in title, if not in substance, as a paradigm to regain, unquote. The German concept of Bildung refers not only to learning and teaching, but also, in James Good's words, to a genetic coming of age through an ongoing process of both personal and cultural maturation. Bildung is a complex term that embodies what Nussel von Rhein deems, quote, the totality of all teaching and learning related activities, unquote, educating the whole person from younger years through lifelong learning. Moses Mendelssohn also aligned the concept with the idea of enlightenment in the form of, quote, unfolding one's potential, unquote. Both denotatively and connotatively, Bildung refers to expansion of the mind, heart, and soul through a wide range of activity and experience, and as Klaus Prange urges, quote, autonomous learning opposed to regular training in the imperatives of the day, unquote. In other words, says Martin Swales from the University College in London, Bildung focuses on non-vocational goals, personal and cultural maturation, and, quote, a belief in inwardness as a source of human distinction, unquote. But what are the origins of Bildung? of Bildung originated in Greek society as pilidon and was subsequently adapted by many cultures. Henrik Bolin, a researcher in the field of education at a university in Sweden, informs us that, quote, in Greek thinking, the ideal of paideia included the development of moral virtues and logical and rhetorical skills, which were thought essential for becoming a good human being and democratic citizen, unquote. There have been continuing interpretations of the concept, from the medieval mystics to the secularization of the Enlightenment, and well beyond to the present day, says Paola Giacomoni, a professor at the University of Trento in Italy. As we know, Bildung became one of the central ideas of modern Western educational tradition. The term was used theologically, spiritually, philosophically, and politically throughout the ages, and by the end of the 18th century, Bildung was becoming a term, quote, associated with liberation of the mind from traditions and superstitions, but also liberation of the German people from a pre-modern political system of small feudal states that owed allegiance to the Holy Roman Empire, unquote. Leibniz, Lessing, Herder, Goethe, Hegel, von Humboldt, and many others are key to an understanding of the interpretations of Bildung. But these are left to others speaking today, including our keynoter, Professor Liliana Weisbach, whose topic is central to this discussion. Scrolling forward to Thomas Mann, who, among many others, represents the rich literary tradition of the German Bildungsroman, commented in 1923 on the German reverence for Bildung, quote, the finest characteristic of the typical German, the best known and also the most flattering to his self-esteem, is his inwardness. It is no accident that it was the Germans who gave to the world the intellectually stimulating and very human literary form which we call the Bildungsroman. The inwardness, the Bildung of a German, implies introspectiveness and individualistic cultural conscience, consideration for the careful tending, the shaping, deepening, and perfecting of one's own personality, unquote. The concept of Bildung is intrinsically interdisciplinary as well as integrative, as Nussel von Rhein argues, spanning historical, philosophical, etymological, literary, and political dimensions of what it means to be an educated person. Therefore, to close and to set the stage for my colleague and co-presenter, Julie Klein, I refer to an article by Veronica B. Mansilla of the Harvard School of Education and principal investigator of a significant interdisciplinary studies project, Project Zero. She entitles her article, Integrative Learning, Setting the Stage for a Pedagogy of the Contemporary, and states, quote, learners of the present and the future must be agents in their own learning, critical inquirers, able to collaborate, able to apply higher order thinking skills to real life problems, to manage cultural competency, and to make meaningful connections across the disciplines, unquote. Linking interdisciplinary and integrative learning, then, to the concept of the totality of learning that characterizes Bildung is certainly appropriate. Finally, returning to the idea of paideia, Henrik Bolin concludes, quote, in a similar vein, today's liberal education in the United States and other countries aims at providing students with a basis of general, non-specialized knowledge and skills, which allow them to contribute actively and positively to society. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roz, for giving us such a good foundation. I have a handout that we are both using. My students call me the handout queen, so make sure you have your handout. Is it for anybody need one? Great. Okay, thanks. Well, I'd like to echo the thanks to Walter for the invitation to join you today, and my colleague Renee for her introduction. I'm really fortunate to have Renee as a colleague in the English department where I live now, and our chair, Ellen Barton, is here, as well as many of us coming in. So it's been a wonderful home. I wanted to talk about a legacy of the concept of Bildung in the United States in particular, and Dean Thomas, it's great that you referenced your undergraduate experience because the legacy of Bill Doon has found a place in the undergraduate experience in the United States in general and liberal education. And our concept of what ought to happen in an undergraduate experience. I also wanted to reference some interdisciplinary models of that. And when I say interdisciplinary, I'm talking about a particular form, integrated cores in the undergrad experience. Roz had referenced, if you look at the top there on the first part of the handout, Roz had referenced a number of cultural ideas that came into the American Academy as a result of the history she sketched and others will be sketching today. The underlying ideas were the education of the whole person, an education that was not utilitarian, that was not technical. Although there are tensions throughout the history, the notion of the underlying ideas here and Bill Doon carry the idea of a whole person and a civic ideal of liberal education as well as a philosophical ideal, but they've always been in tension. They have carried as ideals but then modified to the needs of particular eras. For example, take a look at the Greek paideia, which Roz referenced. It connoted the notion of wisdom, a virtuous life, and good citizenship. And yet, when the Romans reformulated the concept of the Theos paideia, the general education that young men before 17 had in the Greek society, it became a foundation for our liberal arts today. And the bonus artes, a concept that the Romans had at their center of the curriculum, carried on the ideal of broad-based knowledge for moral and practical ends, but particularly to shape the role model of the public man in Roman society, the orator. Well, the Italian humanists would carry these ideals forward too, but they also adapted them to their needs from the era of the Romans through the early modern era. Education, in the sense that we call this cultural legacy of Bill Doon, was primarily a literary education, and in its most reductive forms, it would tend to focus on grammar and textual detail rather than the broader civic ideals, though those were still always there. It's interesting to ratchet up in time to the first American colonial college. The first college in the United States was formed in 1636. It was a Puritan-based curriculum, and a Puritan-based prescribed curriculum. And I won't read to you all that was in it, but it's very interesting when we think of what should happen in an undergraduate education to see what all students were required to take. Everyone took the same curriculum, and in this particular case, it was the elite being trained to become the elite of society, the children of the elite being trained to become the elite. The philosophical complement to the core curriculum was the idea of unitary knowledge, that knowledge was unified and that values were universal. Well, that began to erode as early as 1693, which is the date of the second colonial college. You're a graduate of William and Mary, aren't you? We have a graduate, my colleague Lisa Maruka sitting here, graduate of William and Mary. That curriculum was shaped more by the Scottish tradition of higher education, which emphasized mathematics, history, and science. And by the 18th century, new utilitarian curricula were appearing in colleges, and shares in the professions were introduced. By the 19th century, new technical and vocational schools were being founded. Science made much greater inroads into the curriculum, as well as modern and pragmatic courses and the study of vernacular languages. Moreover, the modern system of disciplinarity took root. It's quite interesting, Roz quoted a very important phrase, the notion that Bill Doon is a paradigm that we should regain, a paradigm that might be regained, a very highly held value. I would argue that it is always being remade. It is remade, you've seen it remade in every era, still carrying forward important common ideas, but shaping, reshaping to the needs of the current era. It was quite interesting when the system of disciplinarity and professionalization took root, which took root in the modern system roughly 1870 to 1910, when 20 to 25 disciplines became the dominant structure of higher learning. There was a resistance movement, if you will, a group of generalists. Jerry Graff argues that generalist as a distinct academic type emerged in the 1870s. And they adapted this older college ideal of general culture, summarized it for you here under a paradigm regained or always remade. They formed a kind of dissenting tradition that even became a sort of humanist myth, if you will, in higher education. They upheld those older values, argued they ought to be at the